Hey everybody, just got home from the computer shop today after class and got me a power supply for the Mid-Tower Deluxe. And this is the power supply I got. And it's actually one I've been wanting to have, or at least the kind of it anyway. This is a single 12 volt rail unit, and it's also partly modular. There are the specifications on the power supply. You can tell this is a good quality power supply when it can put out almost all of its labeled power just on the 12 volt rail. It's a 750 watt power supply and it can put out 744 watts just on the 12 volt rail alone. So anyways, first thing I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be cleaning out the Mid-Tower Deluxe behind the garage. I mean, might as well if I'm doing hardware changes to it. So go ahead and get that cleaned out, and I'll go ahead and get the power supply replaced. Okay, I got my power supply on this computer right now. They're going to get it cleaned out. It's a nice spring day. Finally, it warmed up. I don't know if you've actually been on weather.com, but if you look online, they called the month of March down here Marchuary for a reason. It stayed really cold. It was actually cold as January most of the month. It's actually 70 degrees out here today. A good start off to April, I could say. Anyways, going to get this thing cleaned out. Alrighty, the inside is good and clean. I'm not going to do a close-up this time because I got to get this thing cleaned up and back up and running really soon. But anyways, I'm going to look at something here. You can never trust electrical tape to stay where you want it to. Actually, I have some tape in here to try to help cover the hoses where they exit the back of the case. This isn't the grommet case, it's an older case from 2007. A relatively inexpensive case that doesn't have holes for water cooling system lines. But anyways, let's go ahead and get this back in the house. So I'm going to actually show you in cleaning out the power supply and the side panel fan. Okay, I got the side panel and the power supply, so let's go ahead and clean both these things out. Now for the power supply, and you're probably thinking, Nick, why are you cleaning out a dead power supply for? Well, the thing is, I'm going to do an autopsy of it. I've already found out what the cause of failure was, but also I'm going to part this thing out and save the parts out of it, like, let's see, the switching and rectifying components and all that kind of stuff. Anyways. Also, not to mention the fan is not original too. I installed that, I think, 2 years ago. Or maybe a year ago or something like that. I actually did tour the inside this power supply. You can still smell the burnt smell in it too. Don't smell good either. Alright, everything's cleaned up and ready to go. Okay, just in case you didn't watch my previous video, basically what happened was yesterday was Easter Sunday, March 31st, and we had just got home from a family get-together. The computer was on and everything, running just fine, and nothing was wrong at all. And then we had a power flash because I think a squirrel got very unlucky yesterday when it landed on top of when it decided to jump on top of a transformer or climb a tree and land on a power line or something to cause a fault. And it caused the recloser out there to act, to clear the fault, which it did that. The power went out for about 2 seconds and come back on, just no problem at all. Had it been like the old days when we had that fuse cut out, we would have been without electricity for probably an hour or two. So the recloser did a good job. But the power supply, I believe, was on its last leg. Didn't really like it too much. Because, well, right after the power come back on, the computer, nothing wrong with it, it's just turned off. Obviously getting 5 volt standby power because it turned on for a second. But when it turned on, after I pressed the power button when it turned on, the fans were barely spinning, which is an indication that there was a short in the power supply. And usually when this happens, short circuit protection kicks in on your power supply. But it wasn't just the 12 volt, it was everything. Everything there for a split second. The voltages were not where they were supposed to be at in the power supply. So, that being said, right after it happened, after the power supply came on about a second or two, a chip inside the power supply exploded, resulting in a fairly loud pop. Nothing too bad though, no extreme fireworks show or anything, just a muffled pop, and I saw a bright ember fall at the bottom of his fan. The power supply sits in the computer like this, and a very bright something come falling out because it's hot. It was cherry red hot. Fell out and landed on the computer case. So I let it sit for about 5 or 10 minutes. I opened it up and found out what had blown up, and it was a very small little chip. And I'll take it outside where there's more light. Normally I'd be making this video in another room, but my computer's sitting on my desk in there, on my table. But of course you can't beat the outside light for looking at stuff. And there's my kitty. Anyways, let's go and have a look here. The PCB in this power supply is completely black, which is normal. This is a black, the power supply itself is black. The circuit board is black, the whole entire thing. I don't know if you can see or not, but on the left there is the 5 volt standby transformer, and there is a blown chip. The top is completely gone. And what's funny is the chunk that landed at the bottom of the computer case had the part number listed on it, so I was able to look up a data sheet. This is a Tiny Switch 3. I think that's what it's called, Tiny Switch 3. And what it does, it actually controls a MOSFET. It actually gets primary voltage from the power supply, and I think it might be the 5 volt standby IC. No, not exactly sure. And I believe inside this power supply something else had shorted after that power flash to cause the failure. I don't think the chip itself would just fail on its own. I mean, if it was that, I would actually look through all my power supplies and see if I could find a replacement that's compatible. So anyways, I'll be tearing this apart later this week when I get some time and give it a good little look over and tear it down and get the parts out of it. And I'm saving the case too. This is a very sturdy case. I mean, it's a very sturdy power supply. I'll go and weigh it. Here's a scale. I'll go ahead and weigh this power supply. Now this scale, I think, is it's about probably 1/3 of a pound off. It's just a shipping scale, nothing too fancy. With cables, it weighs, I would say, right about 4 pounds. So it's got some weight to it. Not like most of the cheap power supplies out there. But something in this power supply did not like that power flash. Which brings me to question whether it has good surge protection in it or not. The mid-tower Lux Black Max was also on when that power flash occurred. But it didn't experience any problem at all after the power come back on. Went and turned the computer on, turned on just fine. It has that cherry red Dynapower USA 80W500 power supply. And for a generic power supply, it's built like a tank. Has very good surge protection, very good EMI filter. This is a decent power supply. Even though it's an older design with a -5V rail and not that much 12V power, it runs the system very good, and the CPU's overclock runs very stable. Not a problem at all. This power supply has been going for about 4 years now. The only thing I had to do to it was recap because I had poor quality capacitors in it. So this power supply here is just going right along, no problem at all. Probably the best $25 power supply I've ever seen. Now I'm going to unbox this power supply, the new one. There's a look at the box. It tells you a lot about it on the box. And usually when a power supply has this much information about itself on the box, it's a very good sign the power supply is a good quality unit. And this is an 80+ bronze. It has a 5-year warranty. So let's go ahead and open it up and have a look inside the box. It's like these power supply boxes, every one opens differently. Okay, got it figured out. This is a warranty policy. Set that to the side. And I always love how a new power supply smells. It smells really good. This is a owner's manual. It gives you a lot of information about it. Like the outputs. This is for both the 850 and 750. These power supplies, between the 750 and the 850, the only difference is how much 12V output it has, which nowadays with computer systems they use mainly the 12V rail for the CPU and graphics cards and that kind of stuff. So that's why power supplies, at least built on today's specs, have more 12V power. And here we have a little bag, Velcro bag. See what it has here. Here's all the modular connections. The modular cables are very thin. I mean, they're flat, so that way they don't take too much space in your case. This power supply is kind of like a hybrid modular. All the main connections, like your 24-pin HDX, your 12 volt connections for your CPU, that kind of stuff is on. It's actually hardwired into the power supply. There's power cord, by the way. Let's go ahead and pull this out and take the cover off of the power supply. Here's a look at the power cord and the included screws. And here are some included zip ties. Okay, here's an overview of this power supply. Here's the input. Seeing it's active PFC, it's a full range from 100 to 240 volts. Has a very nice finish, and this power supply is built like a tank. It's extremely heavy. Has a large 140mm fan, and spin around to the back so you can see everything. There's your modular connections. This power supply has only your main connections hardwired, such as your 24 pin motherboard connection is actually 20 plus 4 pin. I believe this is 16 gauge wiring. And here is the connection for your CPU. Go ahead and untie this so you can see how long the wires are. And the remaining components on this power supply, the remaining connectors on this power supply are fully modular. And of course it makes sense to have a power supply designed like this to have your main connections hardwired. So that way your CPU and motherboard get a good source of power, no extra connections necessary. Because anytime you have a connection, there's a possibility for resistance to occur. These connections, the cords are extremely long. The cables are very, very long. So that's good if you have a very large case. Here is the 8-pin CPU connector, which does split in half to give you a 4-pin. But most PCs that will be using this power supply will be using the 8-pin connector. And here's a look at the PCI Express and other connections. These are all modular. All the modular cables. Here's a PCI Express. Floppy disk adapter. 3 Molex connections on one of these cables. Another 3 Molex connections on one cable. We have 3 SATA connections on one cable. 3 more SATA connections on one cable. And we have another cable with more SATA connectors. So if you have a bunch of hard drives in your computer, this would be a power supply to get. And here is one more connector for PCI Express. You actually have 2 connectors on here. So this power supply, you can power 4 video cards with it. And this is a single 12 volt rail power supply. There for a while, many power supplies used multiple 12 volt rails, but recently people have found out that having a single 12 volt rail power supply is much better off for overclocking and stability. There for a while, people thought that having multiple 12 volt rails, like 2 or 4, was the best thing to have. But think of it this way: let's say you got a high-end CPU and you're overclocking your CPU and it's drawing a lot of power. Multiple 12 volt rails are split into smaller segments, and once you max out that segment, you pretty much have maxed out the 12 volt output for that certain segment. For, let's say, like your CPU or a video card or something like that. This power supply has a very powerful single 12 volt rail, which is very ideal. So you can run, like, let's say 4 video cards with this and a, let's say, mid-range high-end CPU, or just have a video card or 2 and have a very high-end CPU overclocked very high and run it with good stability. let's go ahead and have a look inside this thing through the cover. Now, of course, I can't take this apart because it's under warranty. And of course, some other guys, they get these things at review samples and they get the opportunity to take them apart. But I'm not going to do that because this is my own power supply and I want to avoid the warranty. But if you have a look inside, you can see extremely thick cables for the 12 volt outputs. The 5 volt and 3.3 are all on, let's say, your typical 16 gauge or 18 gauge wiring. The 12 volt connections, the yellow wires, are extremely thick, probably 14 gauge, if not maybe 12 gauge. Probably 14 gauge. It's extremely thick. That way there's little to no voltage loss or any resistance between your power supply and your motherboard and video cards, that kind of stuff, and your CPU. So this is a very nice power supply. It's completely filled with Japanese capacitors, Nippon Kimikon. So we know for sure that we shouldn't have to worry about capacitor problems with this power supply. They chose very good quality caps. Some of the capacitors in there are actually solid caps. I see a few solid caps inside there too. And the primary filtering stage, that's something you'll see me talk about a lot in my power supply videos. This one has a good filter stage, no doubt. And the wires going from the AC plug to the board are good and thick. The long coil, I see one of them in there, is extremely huge. Good large wide capacitor. And of course down this area is the PFC controller, if you can't see it. There's a huge PFC coil. I'm going to set this on his back so you can see inside through the front, or the back if you want to call it that. And turn the video camera around so you can see. Look at the size of that PFC coil. It's huge. And notice here, got a heatsink here with not one but 2 bridge rectifiers on it. 2 bridge rectifiers. So this power supply is definitely built like a tank. Definitely designed to run a very high-end machine with no problem at all. And of course, they got the spec label on the back here, so you can see 62 amps on the 12 volt rail. This power supply can put out almost all of its total power just on the 12 volt rail. That's very nice to see. So it's a very, very, very nice power supply. Extremely nice. This will be my first Thermaltake power supply. And I've heard good things about them. I mean, the fact that the thing's got a 5-year warranty on it kind of tells you something, and it's an A+ bronze. Okay, now that you've had a nice little overview of this power supply, it's time to go ahead and get it inside the case. Okay, I got the power supply installed. I'm going to have a look here. That's how the system looks. Still a lot of cables in my system. I mean, there's a lot of hardware in this mid tower. It's just slammed full. Got 3 hard drives. Got a floppy drive. Got a DV-ROM drive, DV burner. If I can find me a SATA DV-ROM, I'm going to go ahead and convert those to SATA, as long as I can put my eMachine's face plates on the drives. There's the motherboard, video card. This is the second Ethernet adapter because I do a peer-to-peer network in my bedroom. When I'm fixing people's computers, I run a crossover cable to that gigabit card there. And a TV tuner, which is about to be out of commission pretty soon because of Time Warner Cable's generosity of taking away analog channels, so that means we're going to be getting a cable card tuner for the TV box and put it back into service, and that TV box has 4 tuners in it with network capability. Anyways, I'm also going to slap in another hard drive to start storing TV on. I mean, why not? The computer's off the desk, it's open. Let's just go ahead and install another hard drive in here. Okay, got that hard drive installed. Got that Western Digital 1 TB drive installed for TV and upload YouTube videos. Now for a moment of truth, let's go and put this thing back together and power it up. Okay everybody, the moment you've all been waiting for. Make sure the water pump is running. And it's about to post. Alright, it's back up and running. New power supply. Okay, another day. Mid-tower Lux is working absolutely wonderful with the new power supply. Let's go and have a closer look at the computer running so you can see this power supply. This power supply runs very quiet. And of course I'm not actually loading it to its 750 watt capacity. I mean, there's only one graphics card in here. The CPU is running at 4.2 gig. I might try to overclock it higher. See if I can get a more stable overclock with this better power supply. The one I had before was not the best for overclocking. There's the hard drives. Every hard drive bay in this computer is filled. Got 4 of them in here. 2 in the middle are for my RAID strike configuration. Those are both 1 TB Seagates. One on top is my 2 TB backup drive. It automatically backs up to this drive every Sunday, so that way I always have a backup of my files just in case one of my RAID drives fail, which I've had that happen before a couple years ago with the older setup. And down at the bottom is that Western Digital Green Power 1 TB drive. That used to be my backup and extra storage drive back when I was running the RAID strike with just 2 500 gig drives. Now I'm using that hard drive to store my TV shows, and I might store my YouTube uploads there too. I think I mentioned that earlier, but anyways, there it is. Now you look at the power supply again. This power supply actually has the ratings up on the other side of the unit, and on the side they got just a little graphic there and tells you it's a Smart M750W, so Smart M750 watt. Got the 5-year warranty thing there and A+ bronze, that kind of stuff, advertising. And there is the modular plugs. This is my first modular power supply that I've had in my system, and it's very nice to have a modular power supply. These cables also are very nice. They're thin, and of course my computer has a bunch of components in it, so I'm using almost all the cables. I think there's only one plug that's still open. That's the PSI Express. Yeah, the extra PSI Express plug is still open because I don't have that many graphics cards. This thing can run 4 with the plugs it has. There's a look at the back of the optical drives to run IDE drives, and I actually still have a floppy disk drive in this thing. I rarely ever use it. Probably once every other month I might actually use the floppy drive. I still kind of like to have one. And another reason why I still got one in is because the case has a permanent molding for a floppy drive. There's a disc in it actually, but I guess if I ever was to give up a floppy disk drive, which I would have to if I went to a 900 series chipset or later on my motherboard, I'd have to take probably a saw or something and try to saw this out to get me a hole there. Now, of course, this is actually a $29 case. I've been using this case for going on 6 years. In May, this case will be 6 years old. Have a custom side panel. That's not the original side panel from the case. I still got the original side panel, and it's got an X theme on the side. I prefer to have a bigger window and have a 120mm fan on the side. And on the back side, I still have the original side panel, but I cut a hole in it with a Dremel and put in a window screen to allow this thing to breathe better from the side where the hard drives and everything are at. Because a lot of air moves through this thing. It stays cool on the inside, especially considering that the heat off the processor goes directly outside to the water cooling system. So anyways, the mid-tower lux is back up and running with a brand new power supply. Any questions or comments? Feel free to ask, and thanks for watching.